welcome back to the Everyday Night. I'm Joe.
And I'm Jeff.
And Jeff, there's been in the zeitgeist a proliferation of cynicism. And I thought that it would be worth examining not just cynicism, but a bunch of other isms that are, you might say, form a spectrum
Sure.
and
A
or a
continuum, if
continuum, a
you will.
continuum, yes. And so I thought those, as I thought about it, I thought, well, these are related to the virtues and worth discussing. Um, um,
Okay.
so that's what I thought we would talk about today.
Well, I concur. I mean that there is certainly these are attitudes that can affect one's ability to uphold or pursue the virtues. So,
Yes. Um, Optimistically, I would predict that you have something to drink tonight.
well, I think that that's actually a realistic
Oh,
prediction based on our uh, 100% accuracy in the past of
well,
my
yeah,
having a drink.
there is a 100% that, however, that does not necessarily, it's reasonable to extrapolate from that.
Yes. I think I,
Although,
I think that that is a fairly realistic prediction based on current evidence.
okay.
So what I'm drinking, as you
Yeah.
have rightly presumed, I'm drinking my sort of go-to cocktail of a small batch bourbon with some orange bitters and a Fever Tree ginger beer.
Oh, nice.
And you, sir,
I have.
I predict it's a wine.
Yes.
And
Yeah. This is, can you tell what sort of wine this is?
it's a white wine.
Yes.
I've got that. Uh, you've never brought out a Chardonnay, so I think I can rule that out. A Pinot Grigio, perhaps.
Close. It's a
Ah,
Pinot Bianco
oh, that's pretty
from
close.
from it is pretty close. And a Chardonnay, the American style Chardonnays are oaked, and I really don't care for that. I've had some French Chardonnays where they don't name them by the region, they name them by the grape, or they don't name them by the grape, they name them by the region, sorry. And they're better, but still not my favorite. This is Pinot Bianco from the Castello di Amorosa in the Napa Valley in California, which is a reproduction of a 14th century Tuscan castle.
Okay.
And we've been there. We've been there a few times, and their wines are really, really, really good. And this Pinot Bianco is it's crisp, but it has a really interesting flavor. It's very nicely balanced, paired very nicely with dinner tonight, which was um, cheese stuffed tortellini in an arrabbiata sauce.
Oh, sounds
And
lovely.
this worked quite well with that. So here's
All
to
right.
you. Yeah.
Ah,
So to give an overview, and we'll define each of these terms, but I think there's a continuum. On the one end, optimism, which can each of these can have variations within them.
well,
Optimism can
like you said, it's a continuum, and
right,
we're just sort of picking
points along.
points on the line.
Right.
Yeah.
So optimism, then realism, skepticism, cynicism, and nihilism.
Okay.
And optimism, I think, which is a hopefulness, a confidence about the future, about the successful outcome of something. I think a certain amount of optimism is useful if you're embarking on on a new endeavor. And we've talked about perseverance, we've talked about fortitude, we've talked about the necessity of those for continuing on a path. But to start the path, you could say takes a certain amount of optimism.
Yeah, or one of our virtues, courage, I think,
Courage. Yes.
informs optimism in a
Yes.
way.
Now, I certainly have, I've said to students when they've read their plans that they've written, and they say, we hope that this will achieve this outcome. And my comment is usually don't hope, plan,
Right.
predict, say this will achieve this outcome. These plans will achieve. Um, Something my father said, don't make a resolution, make a plan. So
Okay.
optimism is useful, but it has to be accompanied by the work.
Right. Well, and there's an ambition also, I think,
Yes.
is optimism is necessary if you have ambition.
Yeah, I I think that's a correct assessment.
And you,
Um,
and it made me, what made me think of that is your students put forward this thing, and I almost expected you to say, well, that's an ambitious plan, ambitious proposal. So what's your plan to
yes.
to
Well,
really,
I tell them to, yeah, be ambitious, go think big. Why
sure.
think small? Why not think big? And I've had, and then it's easier to think big and then break it down into small, achievable units of
Right.
action. Um, but I've had some that have made quite ambitious plans, and they were, I thought, eminently pragmatic in the end, that the way they were viewing it. But it would take courage that unfortunately a lot of executives and management of companies seem to lack to actually embark on that path. Um, so there is a philosophy of optimism. And Leibniz, the philosopher, said that the philosophy is that this world is the best of all possible worlds, and the belief that good must ultimately prevail over evil in the universe. That was set forth as a philosophy of optimism. I've heard that expressed also that the arc of the universe bends towards justice.
Yes.
Um, but um, physics would say it moves toward entropy. So, um, so I think that uh, again, that would take planning. I don't think the arc of the universe bends with in a way other than gravity. I mean, bend space-time is the
Right,
bending of
sure.
space-time, but I think to bend the arc of human endeavor towards justice takes human work.
Yeah, I think that justice needs a little refining in its definition for that to work. That justice is just what is natural. Then I could say, okay, then I might be able to buy that. But I don't think justice is. I think justice
No,
is. I think that the universe is absolutely neutral and unconcerned with justice.
yeah.
Like I say, unless you consider justice to be what is natural in its occurrence.
Well, and it was certainly an optimistic statement, and that may have been Dr. King who said that, but it it needs human assistance in that. Um,
I think that there is an optimism, I believe you're right. I believe it was Martin Luther King Jr. who said that, but I think his philosophy was optimistic in that um, it required him to believe that humans, as a rule, are good and just, and therefore, given filtering through enough people and enough time, justice will, or at least some form or diluted version of justice will out in the
yes,
end.
yeah, and I I I want to believe that.
Yes. But I'm at least
Um,
that optimistic because that's what it
yes,
takes to keep going.
yes. I think one of my previously held optimistic traits was thinking that if people were only presented with enough credible, provable information, that they would be able to change their minds, come to a reasonable conclusion based on the evidence and so on. And I have now, I think there's preconditions to that, that somebody has to be willing to accept credible facts and will be able to process them. I remember in a discussion online with someone once, I said, these are peer-reviewed sources, these are studies, these are credible. And the response was, you can't trust peer-reviewed studies. They're all
Yeah.
just supporting each other. And so, you know,
Well,
okay.
that
I said there's no basis for a discussion here. If we can't agree on even what the facts are, data is, we have no basis for a discussion.
well, and that position describes a complete ignorance of what peer review is,
Yes.
and the understanding that the scientific community in its current form is competitive to the point of cutthroatness, and then that if you can't prove your stuff, somebody is going to pull that rug out.
Yes.
So if it is peer reviewed and upheld, it has gone through a not just cynical, but aggressively antagonistic process before it comes out the end as proof.
Yeah, well, I have actually been a peer reviewer of some papers. And I pointed out everything that was an incorrect assumption, that was not proven by what they did, or that it was usually the problems were there were incorrect assumptions in what they were doing.
Okay.
And I often get asked, when I get asked to peer review, it usually is because it's some it's at the juncture of marketing and design, which are two
Okay.
of my disciplines, right? And usually these studies are conducted by marketing people who have no understanding of design. And so there's
Ah,
all kinds of problems with, you're trying to evaluate these things, but it's unclear. And I had to ask a bunch of questions. They'd have to clarify and say, well, and and they ended up having to pull apart, pull away, withdraw significant segments of the paper until it was something that had far smaller implications
right.
and to be something that could be published.
And
So
that's the case in a scientific peer review,
yeah,
is that they check your math, not
yeah,
just, and what were your, a lot of it goes to what were your testing parameters,
yeah,
and how closely were you monitoring and measuring this? And this could have been explained by these other factors. Did you
yeah,
address those in your
exactly.
paper?
Yeah.
So, yeah, a peer review is rough, and
Yeah, yeah.
it's designed to be.
And so um but it's I do think the other thing I did that was optimistic was write my first book. That was, I remember at one point I wrote the proposal and I met with the publisher and I actually had several different ideas and he thought this, I said, this one, nobody's written about this and there is no other book on the subject and he liked that and I wrote a proposal and he agreed to it and then I had to write the book.
Yeah, right.
And it was that was that was that beginning of something that took a certain amount of optimism and confidence and courage to say, yes, I can do this. I know this. I can do this. But it was yeah, I remember thinking at one point, this is audacious of me to think that little old me could write a book. And now my second book is at the printer. So, you
Great.
know,
Now, I mean, to me, there's we're both artists. We're both
yeah,
we both have gone in art school. We both draw, and I think that sitting down with a pencil and a blank sheet of paper is an act of optimism.
yes. Um, so what I have told when I was teaching design and the times I've taught drawing and painting, I say this to the students, it's a blank canvas, a blank sheet of paper can be one of the most intimidating things. And it's just get started and have a process. Don't think about don't
How
think
hard
about
it's going to be.
and don't think about the end result. Don't think about just follow your process. And I've taught that same principle to a lot of students and multiple disciplines. Say, as a student, your job is to learn your process. Because when you get out into the world, you're working, you go into work and you get up, you work every day, you work the process.
Right.
And
Yeah.
as you go along, you'll refine the process, you'll modify it, but have something to start with, a process that you can follow repeatedly. And
Yeah. As a commercial artist, illustrator,
yeah,
that kind of designer, you you have to produce things.
yes,
You cannot be intimidated by the job in front of you. You, like you say, you have to have a way to start and a process that will take you to the end, usually in a certain amount of time.
yeah, yeah.
There usually for commercial artists there are deadlines and parameters. Parameters can help your process
Well,
in a
they
lot of ways.
can. And one of the things I would do as a teacher is give them limitations
Yeah,
within which to do things because that makes it easier when they have to set their own limitations, their own parameters. It's more difficult when they're still trying to learn the methodology and the techniques. So, so anyway, there's some um, synonyms for that are presented for optimism, but some of them don't quite work. Hopefulness, hope, okay, confidence, optimism, well, not quite. Cheerfulness, I don't think cheerfulness is necessarily
no,
optimism.
I
So I
I know some very cheerful cynics.
yes. So I think the again, I always take synonyms and antonyms with skepticism because and that's true in any language. You'll often see um if you're looking at a dictionary for another language, you'll see multiple words given for this. You'll look up a word and you'll see multiple words given. And it's knowing which one. Um,
Yeah, well, there's idiomatic context
yes,
and dialectic context in any language.
yes. So like the Englishman calling up the tow truck and saying, "My car has an apartment,
Okay.
a flat."
Oh, I see.
You
Gotcha.
see,
If he's an Englishman. Okay.
right, right. Um, and the opposite is pessimism. I'd say pretty much the opposite of optimism is pessimism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it falls on the opposite side of the if the center of our continuum we are drawing at realism,
Yes.
it does fall, I say, at about the same distance, let us say.
Yes. Okay. And I think the next step is realism, the next thing to
Yes.
talk about. And this is um the attitude of accepting a situation as it is and being prepared to deal with it accordingly.
Uh,
Dictionary definition.
when
Um,
when I was when I looked at your continuum you presented real I was trying to think in terms of well what practically represents this? How does one act in each of these realms of philosophy, right? And I was reminded of a Robert Heinlein, I think it was in Stranger in a Strange Land, the concept of the
Bear witness.
the fair witness, yes,
Yes.
who is trained to not interpret or um, uh, assume or predict or he only reports exactly what he sees and
Yes.
experiences himself, herself, whatever.
Yeah. And in fact, the example, because I remember it and I think of it, I've thought of it many times, and I think it's a great example. In the story, um, someone was explaining the concept of a fair witness and says to this woman who is a trained fair witness,
Hmm.
"What color is that house?" And she replies, "The side of the house I can see is white."
Yes.
And I think that's a great example of of that concept. And again, going back to art, the people draw drawing what you see is mostly about seeing.
Yes.
And if you're translating three-dimensional objects into two dimensions, how do you see that? What are you actually seeing? And we've both been through the multiple drawing type of exercises,
Yep.
contact drawing and other things. Um, but people know if you have a can, for example, people know the end of it is round.
Right.
So they tend to draw a circle, except it's not a circle when you're looking at it,
Right.
it's
It's
an
an ellipse.
ellipse. And ellipses, and then say, oh, yeah, okay. And then they'll draw something that looks like an eye with corners. Say ellipses don't have corners. And then
Right.
you start breaking it down. So there's the whole grid method, and there's a
Right.
lot of methods. And once I've seen I've seen illustrations of early Renaissance early Renaissance people drawing, looking through a wooden frame with wires strung across it.
Two of them, so that
Yeah,
they are
so
always looking through it exactly the right.
yeah, they with a viewer hole,
Hmm.
right? So always looking at the same spot, and when they were trying to figure out the rules of perspective,
Right.
um,
Well, then, and there's a it's a trying to remember what that there's a draft they were called draftsmen
yes.
who use these apparatus so that they could render buildings and things mostly.
Well,
Um,
the illustration I recall, I think it may have been. I don't remember if it was an illumination or woodcut or exactly what it was. I don't remember exactly, but I remember I can picture it. The the artist was drawing a reclining figure
mm,
from the feet to get the for
yeah.
concept of foreshortening,
Hmm.
um, which I've so seeing things as they are. So Plato first developed something that is generally referred to as Platonic realism, um, that that concepts, ideas have an objective or absolute existence.
Right.
And these were, and I think that's an interesting philosophy of realism that things have an objective existence. But it's really contrary to the idea of the question, if a tree falls in a forest and nobody's there to hear it, does it make a sound?
Right.
Is
And
reality
this,
objective or subjective?
well, we the scientific answer is, how do you define sound?
Yeah. And how do you define objective and subjective? Um, if we don't observe the planets re revolving around the sun, orbiting the sun, if we don't observe the bending of space-time, the gravitational lensing, if we don't observe those things, they still happen.
Right.
But at the subatomic level, observation changes the
S-
reality. It's
Seems
Heisenberg
to.
seems to, but we don't know for sure.
Right. Right, because
So,
all we can do is observe, and until we observe it, it doesn't affect it. And then
right,
once we observe it, it's affected, but we don't know that it would have
right,
been different if we hadn't observed it.
right.
So,
So, but I'm reminded of um, a, an art professor who said art is pain. And I didn't, but I really wanted to punch him in the arm really hard and say, no, that is pain.
pain
Art,
is pain.
pain is pain. Art, you're talking about the struggle to make art and the persevere and art. Anyway,
Yeah,
um,
and your pain can inform art,
yes.
but yeah, I haven't found art to be particularly painful in and of itself.
Well, trying to
Selling
make
it
a
can be pain.
living from it can be, but
Yeah,
yeah.
or yeah,
Um,
selling it is painful.
yeah. So, I one synonym that was given was pragmatism, and I
For
think
realism.
for realism, and I
Yeah.
don't think that's quite right because realism is about recognizing, accepting the situation. Pragmatism is about your response to it.
Okay.
And so they're related, but I don't think they're the same. Um, so I think realism relates to the virtue of truth, honesty.
Yes.
As we said, the fair witness, the what you actually see, what you actually experience. Um,
And even that, if I remember in the book, recognized somewhat that one witness, even a highly trained witness, still has their perspective.
yes.
Still, it relies on the level of their perception.
Um, Several years ago, I was a volunteer victim in a training exercise uh, for um, for um, shooting mass casualty event at um, a university, and it was a coordinated response among campus security, local police, state police, FBI. It was to give them practice on how to deal with it.
Sure.
And so we're all volunteers and we all got our badge and a number and a indication of what our, if we were
Wound.
injured, if we weren't injured, and then tape were to indicate where the injury was and whether we could move or not move. And it was also training for the medical first responders. And the bad guy came through and, they said, this is the bad guy. And and then he went on, and so when it was done, and I got evac'd and I got treated and so on, then there was a debriefing interview, and they said, did you see the shooter? I said, yes. Can you describe him? I said he was between 5'11 and 6'1", weighed about between 220 and 240, had close cropped gray hair, clean shaven. He was wearing a t-shirt, a blue t-shirt with some kind of emblem here and writing on the back. He was wearing camo cargo pants and brown hiking boots, and he was carrying what seemed to be an old style M16 carry handle style semi-automatic rifle, and he had seemed to have a tattoo protruding from under one sleeve of the on his right arm from under the sleeve of his t-shirt.
Right.
And the guy looked at me and said, "How long did you have to look at him?" I said about 20 seconds, 25 seconds. And he said, he said, how How? And I said, well, I'm an artist. I was trained to observe details and to see things as they
Right.
are and to observe them. I said, if I had him, could looked at him for another 30 seconds or a minute, I probably could draw a picture of him for you. And the guy said, I wish every eyewitness was as skilled as you. I said, well, this is why we need art classes in school, right?
Way to go.
And he said, okay, I never thought about that. I said, well, there you go. So that was a really interesting exercise to participate in. But realism, what do you actually see?
Yeah,
I know eyewitnesses tend to be very unreliable and often
they
contradictory.
they are from um, uh, Neil deGrasse Tyson has said on numerous occasions in interviews that eyewitnesses are the least credible type of evidence
Yeah.
there is, especially from a scientific standpoint.
Yep.
Just, I saw this happen doesn't mean you understood what happened. You just
You
saw
saw a thing.
something.
Yeah, people tend to put their own interpretation on what they saw
Right.
and then present you with the interpretation rather than what they saw.
And there's always, it's not just what you saw, it's what you remember of what you saw. And that can be
Yes.
easily affected
Yes.
between the time you saw it and the time you report it.
Yep.
So,
So the opposite of realism is maybe fantasy. So,
okay. Um, uh, yeah,
and
maybe.
this is not meant as a criticism of anybody's fantasies, whatever they
No.
are. Um, but maybe because it's imagined, it's unreal. And people who cannot tell the difference between reality and fantasy are said to have a cognitive issue, right?
True. I might also offer abstraction as in opposition to realism.
Abstraction, if you're talking about art, abstraction is the abstraction of
No, but
realism.
I'm
So,
not.
but you're not.
I'm talking about reducing something to an idea, not its reality, but reducing
Oh,
something to its idea.
some conceptualism.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. Okay. Abstraction, concept. Okay. I could see that. Those are sort of two different directions
Yes,
it's not a singular opposite. It's different.
right.
That would be an interesting diagram: fantasy, abstraction, and realism. So to consider those. Um, so I'd say next would be skepticism. And some people would argue that skepticism is essential for realism, rationality. And rationality and realism, I think, are related, but doubting the truth of something is skepticism,
Yes.
having doubts. And if you are a realist, and as we talked about proof for something, you want proof, but you're skeptical about the proof and you want to be sure of it.
Well, and there's a quote, and I cannot remember from whom, but it might have been C.S. Lewis, maybe. I'm not sure about that, but he said that um, uh, not believing the truth is foolish, but it's equally foolish to believe something that is not the truth, or to be fooled into thinking that something that is not true is true. That this is opposite sides of the same. It's foolishness to be absolutely skeptical of everything, as it is to be completely accepting of everything.
Mm.
They are equally foolish.
Yeah, to not believe anything or to believe everything are
Right.
both equally, yeah, yeah. I think it's foolish to believe that um C.S. Lewis was a good writer. Uh,
Well, he's a popular writer. We can say that.
yeah, turgid prose.
Oh,
Could,
well,
could,
let's not start critiquing authors. We could go on and on for that.
okay, yeah, we could. That would be something we could. Our favorite authors and our least favorite authors. That would be interesting.
That it would be.
Yeah. Um, so um the opposite of skepticism is belief without question, unquestioning belief, maybe.
Um, we talked about earlier, before we started, we talked about faith as uh, an end of this continuum as well.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and skepticism and faith, hope and skepticism. I mean,
Well, conviction maybe rather than
okay.
skepticism. Um,
Yeah, all right.
yeah.
I think I can see it.
Maybe trust rather than is the opposite
Okay.
of
Yeah, better
skepticism.
than faith, I guess. Trust.
Yeah, trust.
Yeah.
I think faith is the opposite of our next one, which is cynicism.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I can see looking at you know, an a la Indiana Jones type rope bridge. You can either trust it or you can be skeptical of it. It doesn't require faith to cross that bridge. It just
Optimism.
a certain amount of optimism. Yeah.
Well, leap of faith. I wasn't there that was
Yep.
in one in the first one. One of no
The
the
first, uh,
no the Holy Grail.
the Holy Grail. Yes.
Yeah, and the which I enjoyed the movie, but the ending was wrong. So
Okay. We can explore that some other time.
yeah, okay. Um, and so um, there was one synonym for skepticism that was given that I'm unsure about, but I thought was worth mentioning. The theory that certain knowledge is impossible.
Hmm.
And but it didn't define what types
Well,
of
yeah,
knowledge.
certain knowledge. I mean,
That
if it's a
absolutely, it was saying that absolute 100% knowledge of something is not possible. And I think that's really dependent on what you're talking about. If I had hit that professor in the arm um, and said, no, this is pain, I would have been absolutely 100% certain that I had hit him in the arm, and so would he have. Um, but
yeah.
um,
Well, that's we get into
because I was
the
skeptical of what he was saying, I suppose. But
yeah, well, we get into the realm of objective reality at
yeah,
that point.
yeah,
And is there such a thing? Some philosophers say no. And I think that's probably where that springs from.
um, yeah, and that taken to an extreme can be solipsism,
Right.
which the belief that only you exist and your everything else is a construct of your mind, and there are people who think this is all a simulation. I think the game designers should do better than if it is. Um, I do remember seeing a piece of graffiti once, "Solipsists Unite," which I thought was good in the
Yeah.
days of witty graffiti. And then so finally cynicism. Um, there's several different kinds of cynicism that the distrust that things will work out well, belief that people always act selfishly, belief that things can't be successful, people aren't honorable, um, um, that
When I typed into Google when I saw your list, your continuum. I typed into Google, a cynic is a blank, and I let it autofill. And I got several interesting responses that jump around on our continuum
oh,
of a cynic is a disappointed idealist, a cynic is a disappointed romantic.
and we haven't
Uh,
talked about idealism and romanticism really. So yeah.
right, and we haven't discussed romanticism, but a cynic is only a frustrated optimist, and a cynic is what an idealist calls a realist, which I thought was an interesting sort of continuum in itself, sort of a Venn
Well, it isn't.
diagram.
Yeah, I think that is interesting because an um a, an optimist would call a realist a skeptic, and a realist would call a skeptic a cynic, and
Right.
a cynic, a skeptic would call a cynic uh, a nihilist, maybe,
Well, yeah,
or
and a cynic
pessimist, and a cynic would call a pessimist a nihilist. Maybe
a cynic would call a realist an optimist.
yeah, it works the other way too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so I think there is, um, I think the opposite of cynicism might be naivete.
I think that's fair.
Yeah. That if you, and there was a school of cynic, the cynicism in Greek philosophy, um, and self-sufficiency, shamelessness, living in agreement with nature, ridicule of convention, living like an animal, societal norms are unnatural or bad. Um,
Right.
they sound really unpleasant, actually.
Well, it sounds like reaching for it sounds nihilistic in a way that it's rejecting things to me. That sounds like rejecting um, norms and conventions simply to declare oneself an iconoclast. To,
Yes,
to,
but
and
it's not nihilism because that rejects everything as having any value. So,
okay,
so that
but
which is
it
more
still
extreme.
smacks of a sort of uh, what what can I grasp onto that will make me appear to be a rebel? You know,
Yes, and I see a lot of that um, these days in um, unfounded protests based on incorrect information.
well, yeah, or based on a lack of information supplanted by
Misinformation.
wishful thinking.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Um, so I think there is I I think the next one is pessimism, but whether that comes before cynicism or after, it'd be interesting. And
I would,
that's the tendency to see the worst aspect of things or things, believe things, the worst will happen. Um, and with no hope, no confidence, no optimism at all.
well, yeah, and pessimism doesn't seem to necessarily require experience the way cynicism does.
Okay.
So I think you're right. We could put it further out because cynicism, I think you pass through cynicism to pessimism from realism.
Yeah.
So I think that yeah, it's on the outside that it doesn't require evidence. It's you're simply not willing to accept a positive or the potential of a positive outcome.
Right.
A cynic,
Um,
a cynic, I think, says that there could be a positive outcome. He just doesn't believe that it's likely because
yeah.
of these factors.
Turning a cynic into a someone who approves of something would be really interesting. I thought about cynicism because um, I'm so tired of cynicism. The there's so much cynicism, and I'm done with it. I've just had it. It's like every movie review, every theater review, book review, article about society, about uh, technology and music and people and social media and everything is cynical, cynical, cynical. I'm tired of it. It's just it's um it's easier to do
Oh,
than
sure.
it's easier to be a cynic and go into everything thinking with the attitude it's bad than it is to be positive and look for the positive in things.
I
And
think there's, I mean, I could stretch a little bit and say that there's a certain amount of cowardice in cynicism, in that
yeah,
I
okay.
never have an expectation. I know it's going to go bad because it always does. So I'm I can remove myself from the possibility of enjoying this like all you other people, and set myself apart with my superior judgment of this thing, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So, and I
yeah,
think that's where a lot of it comes from, particularly with criticism, critics and critiques in general, that they set themselves above whatever they're reviewing. And once you have set yourself above, you almost have to criticize it because it is not on your level.
yeah. And there's just so much of it. And people think that the negative review, the critical, and not critical in a good, I'm just negatively critical, not a critique. Um, the cynical writing is somehow wittier or cleverer, or no, I think it's easier.
Yeah.
And
I think it's in some ways I think it's the sort of the step sibling of conspiracy theory is
cynicism, yeah,
cynicism, and that again it's the I have I have a greater understanding of this thing because I view it this way. If you don't see it the way I do, you simply don't understand it the way I do.
right. So it's in certain arrogance too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's a grasping. It's a I think that that cynicism, the same way with conspiracy theories, I think are rooted in a lot of ways in an insecurity.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So
Um, and
if you can get over your insecurities, maybe you can let cynicism go and just be merely a pessimist.
which is as you said, I think we said the tendency to see the worst aspect of things or believe the worst will happen. I've heard people say, um, um, hope for the best, plan for the worst,
Yeah,
which seems to me to be a useful combination of attributes, and it also puts an emphasis on planning. It doesn't say hope for the I may hope for the best, but plan for the worst.
yeah.
And
Well, we didn't get into pragmatism exactly, but
no,
it's
we
in it
didn't.
should be in there somewhere.
Well, pragmatism, I think, is the the action of realism.
Right, and that's what
Realism
I'm
is the assessment of the world as it is, and pragmatism is the action you take based on realism.
okay. But I could see it also as a as that action being preparedness,
It could
take
be, yeah,
taking steps to be prepared, which is planning for the worst.
yes. Well,
So
so it bridges a number of
yeah,
concepts. Okay.
but we're agreeing. We're just what's pragmatism? Okay,
Well, I think the our discussion here makes me think that the continuum of these ideas is not linear. It has branches. And
okay.
mm, yeah.
Well,
Um,
it would be optimistic of us to say that this is the only possible way to perceive this whole question.
right. Um, so finally, nihilism that rejects values placed on anything, people, objects, life says everything is meaningless. Existence is useless. There's no truth. Everything's meaningless. Blah, 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 blah. You know,
Right. Yeah.
the um the was the I think it was Annie Hall. Woody Allen is in an art gallery and he looks at a painting and there's a young woman, kind of goth young woman next to him, and he says, "What do you think?" And she talks about it symbolizes the absolute meaninglessness of life and pointlessness of the universe, and we're all doomed, blah 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 blah. And he says, "Are you doing anything Saturday night?" She says, "Committing suicide." He says, "How about Friday night?" So, um, but it's that sort of yeah, no, somebody like that would be just so unpleasant to
Yeah. How about we kill all the nihilists and everybody's dreams come true?
well, if there's no guarantee of that though. The pessimist in me says. Um,
But see,
so
I'm optimistic that if we
but
killed all the nihilists,
yeah, well,
everybody would
yeah,
be
well then
happier.
plan for it, how we do it. And I think the opposite of nihilism is faith. Um, the
Well,
opposite of cynicism is gullibility, I think. Um, people who
okay,
won't believe anything and people or question everything and people who don't question anything. Nihilism, people, nothing is means any is has any meaning. In faith, everything has meaning
right.
sometimes.
Everything you're there's a greater purpose
Right.
you're fulfilling. There's a plan and you have a part in it. You just don't know what it is or can perceive any.
A nihilist and a faithful person walk into a bar. Yeah, there's an there's a whole untapped source of humor in these
Boy,
contradictions.
yeah. I
Uh,
I got to think some of them have been tapped.
Probably.
Yeah.
Um,
In fact, I bet some of them are so old they were written in Greek.
well,
And
probably. That's probably true. I think nihilism rejects is not honest. Though the nihilist would say that they are more honest than thou, which is likely a form of arrogance. Um, because they're not recognizing reality. They're not willing to recognize the reality of anything that's potentially good. Um,
well, and like you said earlier, it's easy to do that.
yeah,
It's easy to reject everything if and your basis for that is that nothing means anything. So therefore nothing means anything. There's
right.
no it's a
And I think
circular
that
argument.
it is, and I think there's a certain um, self-protection in that somebody is saying nothing means anything, therefore I can't be hurt by anything.
Right.
You can only be hurt if you care about something. That you have to care about something for it to um if it's a you have to care about a person for their actions to hurt you.
Well,
You
and
have to care about a thing for its absence to be felt. You have to care about things, something.
well,
So yeah,
it's also there's a certain psychopathy to it as well that
yeah,
nothing matters, therefore I can do what I like because it doesn't matter.
yeah, yeah,
And it's a justification for any sort of antisocial, destructive behavior. Like, what does it matter?
yeah.
So,
Well, so that which some of the branches from these could lead to discussions of anarchy or other types of social, political, organizational constructs
Hmm.
or
Sure.
anti-organizational constructs. Um, so I think it's worth looking at these. And again, my I think my motivation for it was I'm just so tired of people approaching everything with a cynical attitude. And um and I'm
Yeah,
I'm equally tired of people being unrealistically optimistic, I suppose. Maybe a little less tired of it because they're pleasant and they smile and you can ignore them. But it's
and it's rare. You don't run across
yeah,
it as often.
yeah, that's true.
Uh, I had a conversation. I was having a conversation with someone at work the other day, and they were insisting that, well, you know, at some point the, you know, AI or whatever is there are problems. What was it? There are problems. We have to recognize that there are problems we just can't solve. And I said, I totally reject that
Yeah.
attitude. I think with enough time and a certain amount of patience and the right amount of motivation, human beings can accomplish anything. Absolutely anything. I don't think there is
Yeah.
a mystery that we cannot uncover. I don't think there is a goal that we cannot set ourselves that we cannot achieve given time and patience to do it.
Yes.
And I mean, maybe that's optimistic, but all right. So far, so far, we've mostly done it when we
Yeah.
really as a communal organization in one place or another have said, here is what our philosophical goal is, and we're going to do it. We're going to pull together and do it. Mostly we do it.
Yeah. When we can do, and there are bumps along the way, but humanity can accomplish great things. If everybody's pulling in the same direction and
Right?
working towards it. Um, it actually what you're talking about reminds me of, and I don't want to give any spoilers at all to anybody who hasn't seen it or read the book. Um, I just watched the first season of Three Body Problem.
Yeah,
I recommend it very highly. I think it's really good. In fact, I hadn't read the books. I'd heard of them. I hadn't read the books. I've downloaded the books. I want to read them, particularly because I have no confidence that Netflix won't cancel cancel it before renewing it for another season, which they have a tendency to do. But
yeah,
it's really good, and it actually touches on a lot of the things we're talking about and things that you just
yep.
just spoke about.
Well, so The Expanse also has some very good
Yeah.
elements like that. A lot of good science fiction examines the human condition.
Yes.
The
From
very best science fiction.
yeah, from a different point of view to shed light on it. The
Right.
very best science fiction does something that the resetting of Shakespeare into a different time or place can also do,
Yeah,
shedding light on it. Um, like the adaptation of Romeo and Juliet um, with Claire Danes and Leonardo DiCaprio.
sure. West Side Story,
But
for
yeah,
God's sake.
but by putting it in a modern setting, it made clear that Juliet's parents were engaged, were it was child abuse towards her, what their arranged marriage and what they were doing, and the so there was a things like that, and um, it that change of setting, which is very popular with Shakespeare, to be done with Shakespeare, I think is worth doing with other
Well,
looking
it's
at
it
other things as well. And that's what one of the things science fiction does.
well, yeah, and science fiction usually uses, like I said, the best sort of classic science fiction, the Roger Zelazny, the Robert Heinleins, Isaac Asimovs. They take a piece of technology,
Hmm.
whether it's discovered or invented or whatever, And what does humanity do with this new thing? And how does it affect humanity? And how does humanity relate to this new thing? That's and that examination is, to me, what science
Yeah.
fiction is about. Star Wars is not science fiction.
Space opera.
Space
Right.
opera, space science fantasy, I've heard
Yeah.
it referred to as. Star Trek, on the other hand, was actual science fiction.
Yeah.
Um, so, yeah, we're getting off on a
I
pretty
like Star Wars though too.
well. I
Um,
like it for what it was.
yeah.
It was pulp adventure in
Yeah.
space.
And
I mean,
yeah,
how could you go wrong
I
with it?
think I would also include Ursula Le Guin
Yes.
in your list because her examination of things from a different point of view made it it was really interesting.
Oh yeah, we could
So she
between the
did.
two of us, we can name off dozens of authors that are
Yeah.
really good classic science fiction, but
No.
that's not our purpose here.
No.
So, um, maybe some other time.
Maybe some other time. Well, yes. So, I think we've discussed this and I think it's for me useful to talk about these things. Um, so I can understand people better. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons I enjoy these conversations is it's not just about what I think about things. It's helping me to understand by trying to articulate what I think.
Yes.
That helps me to improve my understanding
And
by having to articulate things.
right, well, sharpening our arguments against each other, right, is part of what we're
Yeah,
doing with this.
yeah,
Uh, and I agree. I feel the same way. I it's hard to find these kinds of conversations out in the wild.
yeah.
And you know, usually you could start a conversation like this after two or three whiskeys, but it's hard to stay on track after that many whiskeys.
Well, I think also where conversations used to happen with people, people are now looking at their phones
Yeah, oh yeah.
and checking their email or social media or scrolling TikTok or playing a game or, you know, and so that those random conversations don't seem to happen as much anymore.
Well, and you will be pleased to know, I think, we have a room in our house now that we built especially. I built a long trestle table with benches on either side. And rule number one in this room is no cell phones on the tabletop.
Yep.
And that's if you're here to experience everybody else in this room, not your phone.
Yep.
If you have to look at it to refer to something, if you got somewhere else to be, okay, but you cannot set it down on the table. Rule number one.
Yeah.
It's the only rule we have so far.
I like that as a rule at dinner too.
Yeah.
Not to
I'm, I mean, I'll take my phone down. I've heard arguments about, well, if the guy you're dating sets his phone face down on the table, he's hiding something. He doesn't want to see doesn't want you to see his text messages. Like, no, that's to me, that's just being polite. If you got to have your phone, at least put it face down.
and I would say leave it in your pocket and make sure it's on vibrate.
And I
If you
see, and
have
I
to
find it
answer.
uncomfortable in my pocket. I take it out and set it down just so I am more comfortable in my seat.
Well, okay, then
But I set it aside. It's not something I'm looking
right.
at all. I have this problem at work. We're way off on a tangent now, but two younger guys that I work with now, every time I walk into the room with them, they are on looking at their phone. Now their work is in front of them and they may be doing it sort of intermittently, but until I walk in and they set the phone down and go back to work, they're looking at their phone. And I walk in, I put my phone on my desk and I don't look at it again generally until I leave.
Yeah, it's the I've asked I've asked students Who here considers themselves a multitasker? And people will raise their hands, and I'll say, well, here, I want to share something with you. People don't really multitask. They sequentially single task.
Yeah.
They go from one thing to another and back, but they're only doing one thing at a time. And it's like they'll get where they're going with all these things, but it's the differences between getting on the highway and going and getting off at the end, or driving on city streets where you're stopping, starting up, stopping, starting up. It takes longer. Every time you switch tasks, it
Hmm.
takes there's a slowdown and a startup. So I have a challenge for you. Try single tasking. Try 20 minutes of absolutely uninterrupted, no phone, no other thing you're doing. Focus on what you're doing. Absolutely focus on it. Don't be listening to, turn off music, shut out everything else and just focus on absolutely one thing only. And it freaks them out.
Yeah. Well, there's a Zen. Um, uh, it's not Buddhist. It's a Zen Bushido thing where when you are fighting, just fight.
Yeah.
If you are eating, just eat.
Yep.
If you are sitting, just sit. This is a concept unknown to the last couple generations, I think, that you can just sit, that you can just be alone in your head for
Yeah,
10 minutes at a
I've
time.
challenged students to do that and say, um, sit, start with just a minute. Sit quietly. You can close your eyes, but you can't fall asleep. Don't move. Don't listen to music. Don't have, no distractions. Just sit. Do it for a minute, then for 2 minutes. Try to get up to 20 minutes. Sit for 20 minutes with no distractions, nothing, just your own mind. And uh, that really freaks them out. And I don't even get to the part where I say, and you're supposed to actually empty your mind. If you have a thought of something, you're supposed to let it pass and go back to just like feeling your breath.
Hmm.
And uh, in the years I've been teaching and suggesting that to students, only one student has ever said, that sounds like meditation. I said, it is, but I don't call it that because that would
Yeah.
even you have people come to the idea of meditation with preconceived ideas and didn't want to do that. So
Okay. Well, we can keep talking about
we
this, but I think we've
yeah,
we've
I think we
settled our
have
subject
exhausted the subject.
sufficiently.
Um, so thank you for joining us for this conversation. Please like, share, subscribe, suggest topics that you'd like to hear us talk about. And until we see you next time, be thou
A good night.
and true.